Let me just give a very brief introduction. A very good morning to one and all present here for this 5th day of the FDP. So this FDP is on its final day, and this is one of the final sessions we are having in our 5-day faculty development program, which was conducted under the aegis of USAC Dehradun. And we have today Sujit Ravindran sir. We already met sir on 19th July in our campus. So I would just like to give a very brief introduction about sir. Sujit Ravindran sir is a co-founder of WISE EU Foundation, a global think tank that supports the European Commission in the areas of policy shaping and policy action. Sir is a global traveler, sits on boards of several impact initiatives, is a TEDx speaker and a serial author of several books on leadership and personal development available in 10 languages. In 2012, Sir was conferred with the honor of Ambassador of Peace by the Council of SSC Italy for his efforts on spiritual upliftment. Currently, Sir is in Italy with his family of 2 kids. Today's session is focused around the future of employment, a radical shift from what we had imagined. So I would now request Sir to kindly proceed with the session and address our audience. Please, Sir.
Thank you. Thank you, Mridula, and a good morning to everyone. At this very moment, I'm in Kerala, which is my birthplace. So I'm in my mother's home, and to connect with all of you and share some of these important trends that's happening around both employment and education. It's my privilege. You know, I've had the blessing to visit a COER University on the 19th of July, and I came back impressed with the warmth, the amazing warmth of all the people that I met during that visit. So it's my pleasure to be in this call. Now, where are my thoughts coming from on employment and education? Like Mridula said in the introduction, I'm very blessed to be one of the board of directors of a foundation, of a think tank called WISE EU Foundation, where I support, I advise, I counsel the European Commission on matters of futurism. So they call me a futurist, looking at how the human evolution is happening and what the implications of that are for society, for employment, for economy, for education, for healthcare, etc. So without further ado, once again, thanking you for the opportunity for me to be here. Let's start. You know, I have a few slides, and the idea is I do not want to kind of, burden you with slides, but I'll pull up a couple of slides here and there just to make a point. But I'd like our conversation to be between you and I. And in that process, I have a request from the audience. That is, if there are any questions that's coming up, please don't hesitate to put that in the chat box. Or, you know, I can also pull you into the audio. And Mridula, if you would be so kind to monitor the chat to see if there are any questions or remarks, that would be very, very valuable.
Sure, sir. Sure, sir. I'll do that.
Lovely, lovely. So, having said that, you see, the world we live in, it is being completely redefined by a number of forces. And in 2020, policymakers, whether they are in the United Nations, in the European Commission, national governments, etc., they were saying that massive disruption in employment and education is going to happen by 2035. So imagine that. In 2020, they were saying like in 2035, massive disruption of societal living, of employment, economy, education, etc. is going to happen. However, what ended up happening is we had COVID. That accelerated the disruption to a very, very large extent. Post-COVID, as if the trouble, the burden of COVID was not enough for us, we have the geopolitical situation in Ukraine and Russia. That just accelerated the disruption even more. There's a word the futurists use called VUCA, V-U-C-A. I wonder if anybody here knows the word VUCA. It is a very often used word these days, VUCA. It stands for volatile, uncertain, complex, and ambiguous. So the idea was the VUCA world will come in 2035, but guess what? We are already in the midst of the VUCA world, starting with the pandemic and now the geopolitical crisis in Europe. But it's not a European geopolitical crisis, as you know. It is a global geopolitical crisis. If you look at the inflation that's happening everywhere on the planet, naturally, it is happening everywhere. It's a global geopolitical crisis. So you had the pandemic. On top of it, you have the geopolitical crisis. And of course, already for the last couple of decades, we have one other factor, a third factor that has been playing a role, that is climate change. Climate change is disrupting things unspeakably. You know it in the COER campus, much more than most other people. Climate change, you have some floods happening there. So climate change is disrupting economies, national governments. One part of the country you have drought, another part of the country you have flood. And that is creating significant diversion, distraction for governments and businesses. This is the third force that is redefining the way employment and education is being thought about. And the fourth force is AI, artificial intelligence. That is the last force, the fourth force that is doing a lot of misery for the way employment and education has been thought about. AI. In 2020, Deloitte Consulting, as you would know, many of you would know Deloitte Consulting. Deloitte did a research and came out with a report that said by 2030, excuse me, I'm having a little bit of a flu these days, so I'm not in top shape, but that's all right. By 2030, the Deloitte report said by 2030, 60% of all the jobs available in 2020 will be disrupted by machines. Either those jobs will be made obsolete, or thanks to AI, it can be easily moved to Africa or South America or Far East Asia. So 60% of the jobs that we know will become obsolete due to AI. That is huge. However, we do not have to wait until 2030 for that disruption to begin. Now, with ChatGPT and Bard, we've realized that world has already come in. We already have a situation where pretty much most of the analytical jobs, objective jobs, they are already, machines can do it. So just to scare some of you people a little bit, it is estimated that jobs like finance, accounting, even law, statistics, etc., will become completely disrupted. Even the education of marketing, etc., will be handled by machines through multimedia. And I'll come to this in a little while. But just to highlight, summarize the 4 defining factors that is going to completely redefine employment and education, which is already happening right now, are: 1, the pandemic, which has come and gone. Hopefully it has come and gone, so let's hope it remains gone. 2 is the geopolitical crisis. 3 is the climate change, which has already been on for the last half a decade or more. And 4 is the assurance of AI. These 4 macro socio factors are going to completely redefine employment and education. So, having said that, I want to pull up a slide to share with you. Let me see how I'll pull it up. Share screen. One very big trend that is happening these days, and policymakers at all national levels, at the supranational level, they are aware of it. It would be helpful if everyone would put themselves on mute, just so that the space remains clean. Please, yeah, lovely. If everyone can just go on mute. And if you have a question or so, please unmute yourself, and then we can have a conversation. Now, you would recognize this flow. Every employer that how do they go about in the designing their work, their realization of work? It starts with the work itself. An employer will determine, we need 2 auditors. We need auditing to be done, or quality control to be done in our company. And the best place to have these quality controllers are in the factory floor in Dehradun, for example. And then they will look around and accept applications to recruit people to do the work. This is common sense. This is logic. This is how things have been in the past. First, the employer designs the work that needs to get done, then determines where the work needs to be done, and then who will do the work will be recruited thereafter, starting from what, to where, to who. Now, with millennials and Generation Z in the picture, starting to become part of the workforce, we are starting to notice a big reverse of this flow, a big reversal. We're starting to realize it is in a different way, and if I can make this work, yeah. It is workforce, then followed by work, and then workplace. The idea of finding people is becoming so difficult that there are companies that are already starting in specialized industries. They're starting to look at the workforce that they can access. Once they've recruited that workforce, they'll ask, okay, what kind of work can we give them? Within my portfolio of goals and responsibilities and work that needs to get done in my workplace, what kind of work is there that will suit this workforce that I've recruited? And then ask the question of workplace. And I'm involved in some of these pilots in Europe, where these experiments are going on. Talking of workplace, of course, the pandemic brought in the idea of a remote work, smart work. You can sit at home and you can do the work. Now, the pandemic is gone. You know what is becoming a workplace? Workplace is the whole world. Beaches, seaside, mountain resorts are workplaces. People actually getting in a van, in a campsite, in a tent, etc., and working from there. And today, with global connectivity and laptops, you can do that. Pretty much most of the jobs can have a lot of work being done anywhere, from anywhere in the world. The pandemic proved it. Now, with Gen Z coming on board, there are a few great trends happening. And in the next slide, I want to show that. But for now, you see, just to take a moment to summarize this, that is, the tradition has been, we would think about work, workplace, workforce. And now that is experiencing a massive shift to workforce, work, workplace. And it's valuable for you as faculty members, as educators, to think, what are the implications of this for your education, especially with Gen Z? And then when it comes to employment, there's one other very valuable insight I'll share with you. Let me see if I can pull up the slide. Yeah. You see, traditionally, now, even most of our generation, I have to tell you this, for most of our generation, we would pretty much join the workforce at 25 years old, and we'll retire at 65 years old. That's about 40 years of employment, and then we retire. Hopefully, some of us, after retirement, will have a relaxed life, a good life. With some of us, that's not true. But that has been the norm until Generation X. Now, there's a massive shift happening, starting with the millennials, a massive shift happening when it comes to the idea of the future of employment. One is, let me see if I can make this work. Yeah. You will remember that I can tell you the story, when I was a kid, I had fairly liberal parents, and I'm joking saying this. My parents gave me two options. That is, if I want to go for education, I could choose either to become an engineer or a doctor. So I went on and become an engineer. But these were pretty much the choices that most people from Generation X and before had. Why? Because at that time in the economy, the only jobs, secure jobs available were as a doctor or as an engineer. And the important consideration that we had doing our work was the paycheck. Do we get a steady paycheck in the bank every month? If we do, then that is where we should go. And as the years went by, electronics engineering became popular, computer engineering became popular. And today, if you look at the paycheck opportunities, there are plenty. In a country like India, opportunities are everywhere. So much so that pretty much all the North Americans and West Europeans want to move to India looking for jobs. So when you have all these white people going around, don't take them very seriously. Like, thinking, wow, we are blessed to have all these white folks now in our university, etc. No, a lot of them are jobless in North America or West Europe. It's a very dire crisis. I have a home in Kerala and in Italy. I have to say, Italy is a fourth world country now, not even a third world country. People don't have jobs, democracy doesn't function, administrative corruption is a very, very high, authoritarian state, bribing and all these things everywhere. The informal economy is very, very big. And then you put a little bit of a geopolitical crisis and climate change on top of it. Nobody would ever want to go and live and work in Italy. Now, back to how India is, opportunities are plentiful. The Indian economy is growing at nearly 8% a year, while the Western economies are kind of at a minus percentage. That means it is not growing, it is shrinking. So there is still a lot of focus around paycheck happening. It's coming back now. Either ways, my generation and the generations before, it was simple. Paycheck was the consideration. That means which carrier, which company would give me a paycheck, a steady paycheck, steady salary in the bank. That's where we go. But with the millennials and Gen Z, we are starting to see the trend from paycheck to passion. They are following their passions. It doesn't matter what they get educated in, what their degrees are in, doesn't matter. What matters is, what are they passionate about? If they're passionate about architecture, they'll go for that. Graphic design, they'll go for that. Garden designing, they'll go for that. Travel blogging, they'll go for that. So it is very important for us as educators to think, what is making these people passionate? And we should be unapologetic, unashamed in guiding them in that direction, even if that means losing them from our class, because they are eventually going to be following their passion. This is one of the 4 trends in employment that's happening, from paycheck to passion. Second trend that's happening is lifetime employment. This gig economy, informal economy, etc. that's happening. What is happening is that with Gen Z and millennials, they will have lifetime employment. That means they will not retire at 65. And why would they retire at 65? Their employment will be their passion. I'm fortunate to say I am like that. I do what I love doing. I support policy shaping, policy action. I love writing. I love speaking. I love teaching. I love counseling and advising education institutions. I love that stuff. So at 65, I'm not going to stop it. I might be 95 years old, and I still will do these things because I love doing these things. The millennials and Gen Z are like that. And among you also, there might be some people who are like that. You are probably doing the thing that you most love doing. You wake up in the morning and you're excited about getting to work, to do the things that you love doing, etc. And when you live that kind of a life, your employment does not end at 65 years old. And that is true for millennials and Gen Z. They are probably, of course, they're going to live maybe until they're 120 years old. By the time that they get to the end of their life cycle, the life expectancy would be 120 years old. And they will work until the last day. That is how it's going to be. And then the next trend is, this might be alarming for some of you people, but I can elaborate on this one. The new generation of people can have up to 10 plus careers in their lifetime. Careers, I mean careers, not jobs. Careers. So they might graduate in COER University, let's say in nursing. But then 5 to 7 years later, they will move from nursing to, I don't know, legal. Or from there, they will move to dentistry or whatever it is that they feel passionate about after 5 years. And you will, when you look around and notice, observe the young people around you, you will notice this trend that their passion keeps changing once every 5 to 7 years. Keeps changing. Maybe they change once every 3 years. And I've been very fortunate to coach a couple of European universities who are completely rethinking their graduate offerings. Because if you're in Europe, the graduate programs are 4-year programs, 5-year programs. And they started to realize that these young people, millennials and Gen Z, they're not interested in these 4 or 5-year programs, because why would somebody invest in a 4 or 5-year program in a graduation certificate, knowing that they are going to work in that field only for 3 years or 5 years? That seems like a very asymmetric investment. So the conclusion here is that these universities are completely rethinking their offerings. Now, the idea is in the next 5 to 8 years, by 2030, you will have hundreds of universities across the globe that will be offering hundreds and hundreds of these short-term courses, whether it is 6 months course, 12-month course, etc. Short-term courses. That is going to be the majority of the programs of universities. And what will these people do? The millennials and Gen Z, they will find something passionate, like graphic design. They'll find passionate, or AI becomes passionate, or 3D modeling becomes interesting. They will just go into an education institution, enroll in a 6 to 12-month program, master everything about that field, come away with a certificate or a diploma, and they will jump into that field. And 3 to 5 years from there, they will be thinking about a new career. And they will return to university again. That is the 4th trend in employment that's happening by 2030. Their life, millennials and Gen Z, their life will move on 3 rails. I'll explain this. Of course, we all, if you look at our lives, adults, our life moves on 2 rails. We have our personal life that includes family, children, our extended family, social life, etc. And 2 is our professional life. We wake up in the morning, we get to work at 9 a.m. and we stop work around 5 to 6 p.m. Then we get back to the second rail. That has been the norm for most of us in this call. However, for Gen Z people, their lives will move on 3 rails. One is, of course, the 2 rails, as you know, work and personal life. The 3rd rail is the learning rail. They will have the learning rail, which will go constantly in their lives. Agile learning will happen. That means learning will come to them rather than they go to an educational institution. So COER will have to start thinking, how are we going to ensure that we become the chosen partner for our future students for lifelong learning? And that has got major implications. I do help universities and educational institutions to design themselves, completely reinvent themselves in order to become an education center of the future, an institution of the future. Otherwise, you will become obsolete. For millennials and Gen Z, their life will move on 4 3 rates. So these are the 4 employment trends that you can expect. 4, and I'll pause here for a moment to check if you have any questions. If anybody has any questions, if you want to unmute yourself and share your questions, you may do so. Go ahead, please. You can also share your questions in the chat box, all right? So what did we cover so far?
Very good
Yes,
good
please.
morning, sir.
Yes, Mridula. Yes.
Sir, I'm Dr. Veera Lakshmi.
All right, okay, please.
When you are discussing on the job opportunities for management graduates, you commented that there may be problem with the students who have traditional knowledge of finance, marketing, and other managerial areas. So what should be the characteristics of Generation Z students, especially who are management graduates, so they can be employable and they can be fit for the corporate need?
Wow, it's a Dr. Lakshmi. What a great question. What a great question. I was expecting this question to come. And I'll touch upon this a little bit later in a broader context. But to be a bit more specific at this moment, let me share this. You see, all the objective and analytical sciences can be done by machines much more competently than humans can do it. Studies have started to show that analytical activities can be done by machines with up to 40 times productivity than human beings. 40 times, that is 4,000% efficiency or productivity improvement. Machines can achieve that in analytical jobs. So it of course brings up the question, okay, what then is the use of finance and accounting for people? Why train people on finance and accounting? It's a very, very legitimate question, and I'm grateful, Dr. Lakshmi, you asked that question. It shows that you are very tuned into, what the implications of AI can be for your profession and your students. Now, you got to remember a couple of things. One is, the important thing is, it is extremely valuable for human beings to know the basics of finance and accounting, etc., marketing and all of that. Second is our modern generation. They must be taught how to love learning. That is very, very important. The kids, the young students, the future employees who will completely become failures are going to be those people who do not enjoy the act of learning, because they have to learn and reinvent their whole life. That is a ground reality for them. So if we do not, as educators, as teachers, if we do not inculcate or imbibe in our students the joy of learning, then we've not done a good job, because their learning is never going to end. Their life is going to be in cycles. They will go to the workplace, then they will go back to the education institutions. They'll go to the workplace, back to the education institutions. Lifelong learning is going to be the norm. And if people of the future generation do not love learning, then they will fall through the cracks and become failures, because they will not be able to reinvent themselves. Another thing important to know is, we still expect in an ethical society, human beings will control the machines. It is expected. So, of course, you see these sci-fi movies, etc., where machines take control of human society. very well can happen. It all depends on morals and ethics. However, I want to give the benefit of the doubt and say, whatever it is, human beings will eventually still control machines, robots. That means even if robots are doing finance and accounting, human beings, we will need supervisors for these machines. And there's something else very, very important. I'll touch upon this more extensively in one of the slides. That is, machines cannot do interfacing with human beings. They cannot, because interfacing with human beings needs a different set of intelligences than cognitive intelligence or IQ. Machines can have phenomenal IQ, but it's not enough. Machines with IQ cannot effectively interface with humans. For that interfacing between computers and humans is needed other set of intelligences. And I'll touch upon these other intelligences in a minute. But for now, I hope, Dr. Lakshmi, I've given you some thoughts about where there still might be a role for human beings in analytical sciences like finance.
Yes, sir. Thank you. And I have, sir, one more question, sir.
Go for it. Yeah, go for it.
We talk about emotional intelligence while dealing with people.
Yes.
What will be the place of this particular concept in coming world
Wow.
of Generation Z?
Wow. Very, very valuable remark. Let me see. I will maybe already go there. Maybe you have actually prompted me to go there. So let me pull up that slide, and then we can directly jump in. Let me see. Yes. I'll pull this up on screen. And I'll cover the others, by the way. There are about 6 trends that's massively governing education. And in these trends, all senior policymakers, prime ministers, presidents, etc., are very actively invested in. And that's where I advise and support national and supranational governments. On this question from Dr. Lakshmi, there's already a massive shift happening from a focus on objective education to subjective education. And you talk about objective education, we know, most of the things that we learn in school has been objective education. And that too, the kind of education system that we follow in India has been the British education system. But if you look at how the education system used to be more than 500 years ago in India, the idea was, children used to go to, Gurukul. And Gurukul, the focus of the education used to be on the subjective education, on the education of the self. That was at the very, very core of education. And then on the margin, on the perimeter of the subjective education, the guru every day used to teach a little bit of the objective education. Objective education is the aparavidya. Paravidya is the subjective education, the education of the self. Aparavidya, the objective education, like counting, language, maths, physics, chemistry, finance, even the science of marketing and sales, statistics, all these things, biology, objective education. That's how education used to be handled in India 500 years ago. The British education system, even everywhere in the West for that reason, the Commonwealth education system is one where they've completely eliminated the subjective education in favor of the objective education. And that was okay, because that was in response to the industrial age. In the industrial age, we needed people who could do repetitive jobs for 8 to 10 hours a day, just doing a repetitive job. They needed to do what the industrial age demanded. So the education system responded to that. And that is the system that the British left behind also in India. Though India entered industrialization, at least the modern cycle of industrialization much, much later. You know, it's probably like 40, 50 years old. Now, the objective education is all there is in focus. And now we have a price to pay, because the intelligence that used to be cultivated in objective education was the IQ, the cognitive intelligence. But now, with AI and machines and robotics happening, Dr. Lakshmi, you need to know, machines have got much higher IQ to do things which are predictable in nature. They have much higher productivity. But then, what machines cannot do are a few other things. So I'll summarize that. In the subjective education side of things is the development of, I've written a whole book on this, by the way, called Subtraction. On subjective education, the focus is very strong on emotional intelligence, or emotional intelligence is not accurate. Of course, Daniel Goleman coined that term and popularized it. But emotional intelligence is basically just one element of social intelligence. Because you talk about social intelligence broadly, it includes emotional intelligence, but it also includes an awareness of the environment, of other people's reality, etc. That will be social intelligence. Social intelligence cannot be replaced by machines. We still will need human beings for that. It's very, very crucial. The other intelligence is intuitive intelligence. We have something called intuitive intelligence. We can actually tap into a higher wisdom and find answers. And this is not a fuzzy science, the intuitive intelligence. There are very exact scientific practices for us to sharpen our intuitive intelligence. Now, is it real? It is real. Intuitive intelligence is real. You talk to Albert Einstein and Archimedes and Newton and Ramanujam, etc. They will tell you, C.V. Raman. They will tell you, of course, you know, it is through intuition that I arrived at the answer. The theory of relativity from Einstein, he did not arrive at the theory of relativity by sitting there and crunching numbers. No, it just landed upon him through intuitive intelligence. And then there is another intelligence extremely important, that is spiritual intelligence. The intelligence of the self, knowing the self, self-awareness intelligence. That self-awareness intelligence is also cultivated through subjective education. These three intelligences, that is social intelligence, intuitive intelligence, and spiritual intelligence, cannot be replaced by machines. And there are going to be entire new categories of jobs that are going to be created in the next 8 to 15 years. By 2035, you know, millions of jobs where these intelligences are going to be applied. So we are starting to notice a shift in the trend from objective education to subjective education, because, you know, I can learn everything objective on YouTube these days, on Google these days. And guess what? I can learn this from Google all the while while I'm playing my video games or playing some tennis or cricket, etc., even in my sleep. So this is a big shift that's happening in education. I hope, Dr. Lakshmi, that I've touched upon at least one aspect, some aspects of your question around emotional intelligence. Have I?
Thank you, sir.
Lovely. Then let's go to another one of the big educational trends that's happening, the future of education. If I look at most of my life and the lives of my parents, and if we would look at most of our lives, to be honest, here in this group, most of us, we've been working to live. While for millennials and Gen Z, they will be living to, no, sorry, I got this exactly wrong. It is the opposite. So it's an error, my apologies. It is our generation of people, we used to live to work. Work was everything. You know, if work would take us from Dehradun or Delhi or Sonipat to Roorkee, we will move with the whole family. We'll take our children from the school. We will put them in the school in Roorkee. And most of our waking hours, we would work. And that was a norm until my generation, living to work. So this is inverted, my apologies. Living to work. That was a norm for our generation. We pretty much lived to work. You know, our freedom, our well-being, etc., were in the hands of our employers. Living to work. But if you look at the new generation of people, millennials and Gen Z, they work to live. That's it. They have no job loyalty. They have no responsibility towards the employer's well-being. If that employer's interest is separate, is different from the employee's interest, they will work just sufficient so that they can do their living elsewhere. And the gig economy, part-time economy, etc., are massively growing because of this. Because a lot of millennials and Gen Z people, they've said, like, you know what? I do not want to work more than 20 hours a week. That's it. I'll do this work, whether it's working in McDonald's, I'll do this work. And then with the money I get, I'll go and I'll do the fun things of my life. Or if my passion is graphic design, I'll do graphic design, but then my graphic design work will be 3 hours a day from 10 p.m. to 1 a.m. in the night. I'll do graphic design after everyone has gone to sleep and I finish my dinner. Working to live is become the norm with millennials and Gen Z people compared to all the previous generations where we pretty much used to live to work. This is a big norm, shift in norm that's happening. I'll just move forward. In the meantime, before moving forward, just want to quickly check with you if you have any questions on the idea of working to live, living to work. This is one of the biggest trends we are facing in the future of education. And it's important for you to remember this because you cannot treat millennials and Gen Z people according to the same yardstick with which you have been treated when you were a student. The other important trend that's happening is a move from localized learning to non-localized. What is localized learning? You know, that means for me, if I want to learn anything, I will come and sit within 4 walls in a classroom. That is localized learning. Sit within 4 walls. And everything I need to learn will be offered by COER University, the faculty of COER University, or the computer lab, or the library, etc. That's localized learning, where learning is localized to 4 walls. You have to rethink learning for Gen Z people, because for Gen Z, they respond best to non-localized learning. What does that mean? Learning will be on-site and online. It will be auditory, visual, kinesthetic, etc. Learning will happen while they are at work, while they are at home, while they are at school or college. Education has spilled over the boundaries of the education institution. It has already happened. So if you think you're the subject matter expert and you expect the students to come to you and learn only from you, that is a recipe for disaster. Because that is not how the brains of Gen Z people are wired. They absorb learning through multimedia, multi-sensorial experience in multiple places. That is what moving from localized learning to non-localized learning means in this context. That the boundaries are broken of what we call the education institution. We have to have the education to very, very much move to where the students are, rather than expecting the students to move where the education is. If you have any remarks, don't hesitate to say, put that in the chat box. And I'll just move on and close on a couple of things more. We have noticed there's a massive shift from conformity to morality. And what is conformity and why is morality the opposite of conformity? Now, you see, in the industrial age, the idea was we had to create employees who had all a consistent quality. Employees who could expect, when they go to the workplace, to the factory, everyone, they had the same quality to do the same things with a consistent quality, 8 hours a day, 10 hours a day. That was conformity. In the IQ paradigm, in the industrial age, conformity was extremely important. That means they should be consistent, they should be reliable, etc. Morality is a completely different game. And what do I want to share here is conformity is, the definition of conformity is doing something no matter if it is the right thing. Doesn't matter. We just do a certain thing no matter it's the right thing. In morality, it is doing the right thing no matter what others do. You see, it's exactly the opposite. Conformity is doing what others do no matter what is right, and morality is doing the right thing no matter what others do. Now, this has become very, very important, crucial in the pandemic time. To India's credit, India handled democracy and the pandemic with great maturity. I mean the Indian policymakers and the Indian citizens. In the Western countries, the so-called temples of democracy, the hypocrisy was that they will lecture the rest of the world on democracy. But the moment the pandemic hit, what did many Western countries do, including Canada, Italy, Spain, Australia, Austria, France, etc.? and to some extent other countries like Belgium, Netherlands, etc., but to a much lesser extent. What did these so-called temples of democracy do? They suspended the constitution. That was it. Even the military on the roads, to enforce that people obey. Of course, if it is a country like China, you can expect that. China is very open that it's not a democracy. It does not expect to conduct itself as a democracy. You know, it is a it's an autocracy. It's a dictatorship. There, of course, there's no question of suspending the constitution and, being blamed for it. No. But the so-called Western democracies, what did they do? The pandemic came in, they just suspended the constitutional right to work, the constitutional right to healthcare, the constitutional right to education, the constitutional right to movement, the constitutional right to free speech. Everything was pulled out. Constitution was thrown in the garbage. This is what happened during the pandemic. So it's fascinating. Now, it includes even the European Commission that likes to lecture still other bodies on constitutional morality, on democratic morality, etc. Fortunately, the good news is with the Gen Z and millennials, there's a big shift from conformism. Like, if we look at our parents, I can look at my own parents and tell you that political conformity was an important thing for them. That means there was this dynasties, whether at a state or national level, and they would be standing like this, with their head bent down to the dynasties of politics or administrative dynasties or power. That was conformity. Now, if you look at the millennials and Gen Z, conformity is not of interest to them. They're not interested in paying respect to authority. But on the other hand, they have a great sensitivity for morality. They are the biggest champions of climate change, of gender equality. They ask all these important questions, and they expect that there would be a very strong focus on morality, whether it is taking care of plants and animals, racial justice, gender justice, environmental justice. There's a very strong focus on morality among the new generations. So in our education, it's important that we keep in mind that we always know that morality is a very, very strong force in the new generations, in spite of whatever their education has been. That is the fourth. Excuse me. The fifth, very important, and here is where our role comes in, by the way, as educators. There's a very big shift happening from moving from systemic conditioning to systemic unconditioning. What does that mean? It implies us as educators that we have to constantly in education, we have to think new. We have to work on ourselves, because the life we live is the lesson we teach, as Mahatma Gandhi mentioned. And the implication is that everything that we've learned in the past, we might be a PhD in a certain field. That doesn't mean anything today, because the evolution of science is so rapid that what we've learned 10 years ago is probably obsolete by now. So what this means is we, as the system, the educational system, the employment system, we have to take the conditioning away. We have to constantly be in this learning process. And that's why I admire, when Pankaj suggested to me, and later Dr. Mridula supported me in coming on this faculty development program. I was very enthusiastic because you are setting the right example, that you have to constantly be learning. Otherwise, you become obsolete. And that is what systemic unconditioning means, that your philosophy, your science, your culture, your personality traits, your teaching mannerism needs to be constantly reinvented. That is what moving from systemic conditioning to systemic unconditioning means. Essentially, the message here is that the onus, the focus, the burden of responsibility to constantly evolve as educators is on us. And if we stop, then we become obsolete. That is the message of systemic unconditioning. And the sixth big educational trend is a trend of moving from comfort to resilience. What does this mean? I think we are a great example. Our resilience level is very, very high. We have the ability to bounce back from all kinds of setbacks in life. That's how we grew up. We grew up with materially very little, and we had great resilience. We will have a failure in life, and with the failure, we will learn a lesson, we will bounce back, and we'll become even better as a consequence. We are the resilient generation. Our parents and grandparents too were highly resilient, but our generation, Gen X, has been exceptionally resilient. We would bounce back from failures. Like a tennis ball, it'll bounce back. That is extremely important today because the world is moving so fast that entire categories of jobs will become obsolete and new categories will keep evolving. And then again, those categories will become obsolete and new categories of jobs will get evolved. Relationships with the millennials and Gen Z, it's a norm. Don't expect lifelong marital relationships with the Gen Z people. It's not their nature, their norm. That means they will be in a relationship for as long as that relationship is a very joyful, loving experience. And once that love and joy is not there anymore, they will just walk away from each other. We will have to accept that to be the norm. Even in Indian cities, now we are starting to see this at a very large scale happening. In such a volatile, uncertain life, economically, relationally, personal life-wise, health-wise, etc., resilience is extremely important. And why is it also important? Because, you've got to remember, millennials and Gen Z are the product of our sacrifices. And what have we done? We have made all the sacrifices of our life so that our children have a better life than us. All the young kids are given two-wheelers, smartphones. They have Wi-Fi and computers and laptops, etc. Massive pocket allowances. They go pretty much every evening with their friends to the McDonald's and other places. We brought them up very, very protected. And what that will do is, on the one hand, millennials and Gen Z growing up in great comfort with very little resilience. On the other hand, the world they live in is a VUCA world, the world that I referred to in the beginning, volatile, uncertain, complex, and ambiguous. They are going to be completely burned out. They're going to have nervous breakdowns. They're going to have psychosomatic disorders, mental health issues, because they don't have resilience. So the important message here is we start putting them outside their comfort zone so that they start building resilience. That must be part of the educational curriculum. Great. So that is the sixth trend that I wanted to put out. The whole idea of moving from comfort building to resilience building. Now, I'll leave it here. Also, in the interest of time, I will leave it here. And, I'm reaching the end of the hour that I promised Dr. Mridula. Just open up this space. Also asking Dr. Mridula, whenever you want me to stop, we can close. With that, do you have any questions or observations? Anybody here? You're welcome to unmute yourself or put your remarks in the chat box. We'll take maybe a couple of minutes.
Anyone having any question, kindly unmute yourself.
Well, if you don't have any questions, that can only mean two things. One is the whole idea of the future of employment and education is very clear to you, or nothing I shared makes any sense to you. So let me see if there's a remark. All right, okay.
There is no question, but there is one feedback in the chat box.
All right.
Vivek Agarwal, session was very extremely relevant and interesting. Thanks for the session, sir.
Thank you, indeed.
Vivek Agarwal.
I'm glad that you recognize that, because the prime ministers and presidents of different nations recognize the future of employment and education is so important, because the rapid evolution of artificial intelligence, including the climate change issues and geopolitical crisis, and then the pandemic that happened before, etc. These are unstoppable forces. So it's we as society, as educators, as educational policymakers, we have to understand where humanity is going. So, I'm glad that you have recognized how important this thinking is. So thank you for the acknowledgements in the chat box. And thank you all. Thank you all for, being here. There were like 100 participants and still 100 participants from the beginning till the end. It shows your devotion and level of commitment to your profession, to your vocation. It's a very divine profession. Teaching is such a special job that, in our tradition, we would look at our gurus, our acharyas, as with reverence, with great respect. And you are doing that work. So I want to acknowledge that. I want to acknowledge your interest in the topic. And I want to thank particularly Pankaj and Dr. Mridula for being such amazing champions, for the amazing support that you offered for me to be able to come here in the middle of my vacation. Thank you. Thank you all.
Thank you. Thank you, sir. Thank you for this very insightful and very meaningful lecture and session on the future of employment. And this concept of VUCA, which included the pandemic or the climate change or the changing job requirements, it definitely was very thought-provoking and enlightening for all of us. and the integration of the characteristics and the preferences of Gen Z and millennials into a broader discourse on the future of employment was very inspiring for us, sir.
Wow.
So I believe that with the emphasis on the continuous learning and fostering a growth mindset definitely will is a major key takeaway from this session, and we all are undoubtedly benefited by this very provoking session, sir.
Thank you. Thank
Once
you
again,
all.
thank you so much, sir.
Thank you. I send you my blessings from Kerala, and I wish you all a great continuation of the faculty development program.
Thank you so much, sir.
Goodbye to everyone. Bye-bye.
Bye, sir.
Bye, sir.